From the earliest moments of our upbringing, many of us were conditioned to believe that silence is a virtue. We were praised for being agreeable, rewarded for keeping the peace, and taught that conflict is something to be feared, not faced. However, as Carl Jung so often warned, the danger of such conditioning is that it can mask a deeper wound. Silence may appear as maturity, but beneath its surface, it may be fear dressed in the clothing of politeness. And fear, when ignored, becomes a quiet thief. It steals your voice. It drains your spirit. It whispers that your truth is too much, too risky, too inconvenient to be heard. How many times have you bitten your tongue, not because it felt wise, but because it felt safer? How often have you nodded in agreement to avoid friction, even as your soul recoiled inside? There comes a moment in life, usually after decades of self-abandonment, when the cost of silence becomes too great to bear. The pressure of unspoken truths builds like steam in a sealed chamber, and what once felt like peace begins to feel like a prison. Jung believed that we are not here to merely conform but to individuate, to become whole. And wholeness does not come from obedience, it comes from inner truth. Yet the world often punishes authenticity and rewards the mask. It tells you that speaking up is disruptive, that saying no is selfish, that having needs is a burden. But your inner life knows better. There is a part of you that longs to be seen, not for the role you play, but for the soul you carry. This is not a call to chaos, it is a call to courage. The courage to face the discomfort of disagreement. The courage to trust your intuition over social approval. The courage to stop editing yourself just to keep others comfortable. Because silence, when born from fear, is not peace. It is the slow erasure of self. You were not born to be agreeable, you were born to be authentic. And sometimes the most powerful act of love, for yourself and for others, is to speak the truth, even when your voice trembles. There is a quiet kind of suffering that builds over time, so subtly that many do not recognize it until something inside begins to break. It begins with small silences, moments when you choose not to speak up, not to disagree, not to disrupt the fragile peace. At first it feels noble, you convince yourself you are being mature, selfless, or even loving. But beneath the surface, something sacred starts to slip away, your truth. Carl Jung warned that emotions do not vanish when repressed. They simply descend into the unconscious, where they continue to live, reshaping the personality from behind the scenes. You may think you've let it go, but the truth you buried begins to reshape your life in whispers and distortions. Over time, these silences accumulate into something heavier. You begin to forget what you actually feel, because you've been feeling for others. You hesitate before answering simple questions, because your mind automatically calculates what response will cause the least friction. You begin to live as a version of yourself designed for survival, not for truth. This is not kindness. This is self-abandonment, and it is far more common than we admit. For those in long-term roles, whether as partners, parents, friends, or employees, this pattern can become deeply ingrained. You become the reliable one, the agreeable one, the one who never causes problems. But beneath that mask is a quiet ache, a longing to be known not for your harmony, but for your honesty. Because every time you choose comfort over truth, you hand another piece of your identity to someone else. Eventually, you begin to wonder where you went. The mirror reflects a face that looks familiar, but behind the eyes, something feels missing. Jung called this fragmentation of the self one of the greatest dangers of repression. When you spend your life avoiding conflict, you do not find peace. You become hostage to your fear of disapproval. The soul grows restless in its silence, and the body begins to carry the burden. Headaches, tension, exhaustion, emotional numbness. all become signs of a life that has grown too far from its center. But healing begins with a return to your original voice, a return to the knowing that you are allowed to feel what you feel, want what you want, and say what needs to be said. Reclaiming yourself is not an act of rebellion, it is an act of restoration. It is the soul remembering who it was before the fear taught it to hide. There is a quiet kind of suffering that builds over time, so subtly that many do not recognize it until something inside begins to break. It begins with small silences, moments when you choose not to speak up, not to disagree, not to disrupt the fragile peace. At first it feels noble. You convince yourself you are being mature, selfless, or even loving. But beneath the surface, something sacred starts to slip away: your truth. Carl Jung warned that emotions do not vanish when repressed. They simply descend into the unconscious, where they continue to live, reshaping the personality from behind the scenes. You may think you've let it go, but the truth you buried begins to reshape your life in whispers and distortions. Over time, these silences accumulate into something heavier. You begin to forget what you actually feel, because you've been feeling for others. You hesitate before answering simple questions, because your mind automatically calculates what response will cause the least friction. You begin to live as a version of yourself designed for survival, not for truth. This is not kindness. This is self-abandonment, and it is far more common than we admit. For those in long-term roles, whether as partners, parents, friends, or employees, this pattern can become deeply ingrained. You become the reliable one, the agreeable one, the one who never causes problems. But beneath that mask is a quiet ache, a longing to be known not for your harmony, but for your honesty. Because every time you choose comfort over truth, you hand another piece of your identity to someone else. Eventually, you begin to wonder where you went. The mirror reflects a face that looks familiar, but behind the eyes, something feels missing. Jung called this fragmentation of the self one of the greatest dangers of repression. When you spend your life avoiding conflict, you do not find peace. You become hostage to your fear of disapproval. The soul grows restless in its silence, and the body begins to carry the burden. Headaches, tension, exhaustion, emotional numbness, all become signs of a life that has grown too far from its center. But healing begins with a return to your original voice, a return to the knowing that you are allowed to feel what you feel, want what you want, and say what needs to be said. Reclaiming yourself is not an act of rebellion, it is an act of restoration. It is the soul remembering who it was before the fear taught it to hide. There is a quiet moment many people recognize, a pause after saying "it's fine" when it's anything but. On the surface, it looks like maturity. On the inside, something sacred recoils. Each time we deny what we feel, a piece of the self retreats deeper into the shadows. Jung saw resentment not as a flaw but as a flare signal, a cry from the buried self trying to rise through the cracks of repression. Resentment is not born in rage, it is born in silence. And it does not erupt all at once. It builds slowly, like pressure under stone. At first you may not even notice it. You call it patience. You call it love. You tell yourself you're being the better person. But over time, the emotional cost reveals itself in subtle ways. Your tone grows colder. Your smile becomes tight. You begin to replay old conversations in your head, imagining what you should have said. The unspoken becomes heavy. Your soul begins to ache in places your words never reached. This is not simply emotional discomfort. This is the slow decay of authenticity. When boundaries are not voiced, they do not disappear, they fester. They twist into sarcasm, withdrawal, or exhaustion. Passive-aggressive comments replace honest conversations. Cold silence replaces emotional presence. What once felt like compassion starts to feel like martyrdom. You become a stranger in your own life, present but not fully alive. You are not just avoiding conflict with others, you are now at war with yourself. This internal split leads to deep spiritual fatigue. You may wake up tired, even after sleeping. Joy becomes fleeting. Relationships feel obligatory. It is not because life is inherently hollow, it is because your truth has no voice in it. The more you betray your inner reality, the more life becomes a performance rather than an experience. You are not only hurt, you are unseen, unheard, and untouched by the life you are living. But this pain carries a gift. It is a call to reclaim the voice you silenced. The way out is not to explode or blame, but to return to the self that has been waiting behind every "I'm okay." Healing begins when you honor what is real, when you name the truth, not to harm, but to heal. Resentment, when listened to, becomes revelation. It points you to the places where your soul was left behind. Follow it, and you begin to come home. You are not meant to live behind unspoken walls. Your voice was never the problem, the silence was. At some point, silence becomes too loud to bear, not because others have changed, but because something within you begins to stir. A quiet, almost defiant voice emerges, not angry but clear. It whispers what you once feared to believe. You were never meant to live small. This is the voice of your authentic self, calling you back. Jung called this sacred return, the process of individuation. Nietzsche called it the will to power. It is not about dominance or control. It is the power to become whole, to live fully as who you are, without shrinking to fit the comfort of others. This awakening does not arrive with fireworks. It comes through frustration, fatigue, and a sense that your life is no longer your own. You begin to realize that the roles you have played are cages dressed as virtue. You were not born to endlessly absorb, to agree, to smile through your own erasure. The deeper truth is this: saying no is not a betrayal. It is a beginning. Taking up space is not arrogance, it is alignment. And choosing your own soul over someone else's comfort is not selfishness, it is survival of the self. Many people, especially in midlife, reach a crossroads where their inner life can no longer tolerate outer compromise. The weight of unspoken needs, forgotten dreams, and emotional self-abandonment becomes unbearable. This is the breaking point, but also the turning point. You begin to see that pleasing others has cost you too much, and slowly you start to reclaim what was once given away without question: your time, your truth, your voice. Reclaiming yourself is not loud, it is rooted. It is the quiet power of no without guilt, of choosing solitude over fake harmony, of walking away without apology. You no longer exist to be understood by everyone. You exist to live a life that feels honest in your bones. The more you embody this truth, the more your energy shifts. You attract differently. You respond differently. You breathe differently. Because you are no longer surviving behind a mask. You are living from your center. This is the will to power, not the power over others, but the power to return to yourself, to hold your truth like a sacred flame, even when it flickers in the wind, and to protect that flame with boundaries, language, and presence. The journey is not easy. It often comes with loss. But what you lose is the version of you that was never whole to begin with. What you gain is the self that was waiting all along. Every soul that seeks truth must pass through an inner desert, and in that vast landscape, the first figure to appear is the camel. It kneels beneath the burden of expectation, conditioned to carry the weight of shoulds and musts without protest. The camel walks through life absorbing what it is told is right. Be good, be quiet, be selfless, even when it means abandoning its own instincts. Many live in this phase for years, mistaking endurance for virtue and mending for peace. But deep within, something grows restless. A question begins to rise like heat from the sand. Whose life am I carrying? This question awakens the second metamorphosis. The camel, no longer able to bear the weight, transforms into the lion. The lion does not roar for attention, but for sovereignty. It is the part of you that finally says no, not with rage, but with clarity. The lion tears through inherited beliefs, outdated roles, and the illusion that self-sacrifice is the highest good. It does not seek permission to exist. It simply begins to exist. This stage is not always graceful. It may look like walking away, standing alone, or disrupting the roles others expect you to play. But this is the sacred rebellion, where the soul stops whispering and begins to speak. Yet even the lion is not the final form. For once the soul has reclaimed its territory, and there is something more to be discovered. Not a return to obedience, but a rebirth into something freer. This is the child. Not naive, but sacredly free. The child is the self restored. It dances not to please, but because it remembers joy. It is not to perform, but because life itself is an art. The child has no interest in proving worth or winning battles. It simply lives, with innocence returned and shame dissolved. Jung saw these three stages not as rigid steps, but as psychological energies that guide the journey toward individuation. You may find yourself in the camel's silence, the lion's rebellion, or the child's liberation at different moments in life. The key is not to rush, but to recognize. Healing does not ask you to be perfect. It asks you to be honest. And when you see yourself clearly, you no longer carry what is not yours. You no longer fight battles that are already won. And you no longer fear being who you were before the world told you to hide. Most people spend their lives trying to avoid conflict, as if it were a fire that could burn them beyond repair. However, according to the teachings of Jung, conflict is not an enemy, it is a sacred mirror. It shows you who you are beneath your politeness, beneath your conditioning, beneath your performance. It is not the conflict itself that wounds you, it is the silence that precedes it, the self-betrayal that accumulates when you choose comfort over truth. For conflict is not chaos, it is clarity. It is the place where your deeper self steps forward and dares to be seen. We live in a culture that worships harmony, but often at the expense of authenticity. We are taught to keep the peace, but no one asks if that peace is real or just the absence of honesty. Many reach adulthood realizing they have crafted entire lives, marriages, careers, even belief systems, not from conviction, but from the fear of confrontation. They have avoided conflict so long that they no longer recognize their own voice. But life has a strange way of demanding truth. Sooner or later, the soul rebels, and it does not do so quietly. Conflict becomes the arena where you reclaim your voice. It is the moment you say, "This is who I am," even if it costs you approval. It is when you speak your boundary, even when your hands shake. This is not about aggression or dominance. It is about presence. Conflict reveals the edges of your being. It shows where you begin and where others end. It exposes where you've been too silent and where you've overextended. And in this raw unveiling, something powerful emerges. Not a role, not a reaction, but yourself. Jung believed that inner transformation cannot happen without confrontation. To individuate is to face the friction between who you were taught to be and who you truly are. That friction is the birthplace of freedom. It strips away illusions and demands that you meet yourself with honesty, and while it may feel uncomfortable or even terrifying, it is also the doorway to authenticity. Healing, then, is not the absence of conflict. It is the ability to remain rooted in your truth while standing in it, to breathe through the tension, to choose not silence, but sovereignty. Your voice is not a weapon. It is a bridge to your soul, and every time you use it to name your truth, you step closer to the life that was waiting on the other side of fear. There comes a moment on the path of healing when silence is no longer a shield, but a chain. You begin to realize that every time you swallow your truth for the sake of peace, you do not just pacify the moment, you fracture your inner world. Carl Jung understood this deeply. He saw that the soul does not thrive in pretense. It does not grow in environments where authenticity is punished and conformity is praised. The soul withers in silence, but it awakens the moment you honor its voice. This is not easy, especially for those who have spent a lifetime earning love through compliance. When your nervous system is wired to equate conflict with danger, speaking your truth can feel like walking into fire. But Jung did not see this fire as something to run from. He saw it as alchemical, necessary. It burns away illusion, burns away fear, burns away the conditioned self that learned to betray its own needs just to be accepted. That fire is painful, but it is also purifying. To speak your truth is not to declare war, it is to come home to yourself. It is to reclaim every part of you that was once exiled in silence. The inner child who learned it was safer to be invisible. The adult who still nods politely while their soul screams underneath. Each no that you say from the core of your being is a yes to the self that longs to live freely. Each boundary you set is not a wall, it is a doorway to deeper presence, to conscious living, to peace that is earned through integrity. You were not born to be endlessly agreeable. You were not placed here to be an echo of other people's expectations. You are not meant to vanish into roles, titles, or masks that make others comfortable. You were born to become whole. And wholeness is not quiet. It is not passive. It is the full presence of your being, rooted in clarity, expressed with courage, and lived without apology. There will still be moments when silence feels easier. Moments when keeping the peace feels safer than risking rejection. But let those moments be invitations, not prisons. Let them be reminders that you are on a path, a sacred path, not of perfection, but of truth. Because healing is not the absence of pain, it is the presence of your soul, fully embodied, no longer hidden in the shadows. Within you lives the camel who carried what was never yours to bear. Within you lives the lion who is learning to protect what is sacred. And within you lives the child who still dreams, who still creates, who still believes in freedom. They are not lost. They are waiting for you, for your voice, for your courage, for the moment you say, I choose to stay silent no more. And in that moment you are not just healing, you are returning, you are remembering, you are becoming who you were always meant to be. If this message stirred something inside you, don't stop here. The next video will take you deeper into healing, growth, and self-discovery. It might just be the breakthrough your soul has been waiting for. Tap into it now. Hit subscribe, turn on notifications, and join a community committed to truth, transformation, and real inner change. You're not alone on this path. I'll meet you in the following video, where we continue becoming who we were always meant to be.